Caitlin's a fantastic member of our team here on the services department. She is the director of client services. Caitlin, previously before working at Central Desktop, actually worked at Google, managing key accounts. And Caitlin, one of the reasons she's doing this presentation is she has a passion for user design. So with that in mind, Caitlin, feel free to come up.
Hello, everyone. So glad you all could make it. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces that have come back year over year. Like Katie mentioned, I get the distinct pleasure today to talk about white-hot workspace design. And it's something that I am personally really passionate about and excited about. Isaac said something in his kind of opening address that I thought kind of struck me, was this ability to transform the way users are working. And I think that's why we're all in the room today. I think everyone probably shares that general passion of looking for a better way to do things and kind of looking for ways to transform and kind of enhance that user experience. And I think Beth's presentation was great. We want to drive user adoption and engagement, and I think the foundation of both of those things kind of starts in our overall workspace design. So I get to talk about that, and I'm super excited. Before I jump into that, I wanted to share a story from one of my first weeks at Central Desktop. I was working with a new client, and on the scale of user savviness, I would say their user base wasn't super savvy, and we were having conversations around their concerns of just driving user adoption and kind of having that rollout and change management. And my client said something to me that at the time I thought was kind of funny, but it really struck a chord, and he said, I'm looking at this opportunity with Central Desktop kind of as the way that it was when email first came out. And I had to pause for a minute because ever since I've been working, email has been a kind of cornerstone and fundamental part of what I do with my daily tasks. But from his perspective, he'd been working quite a bit longer, and he said when email first came out, we had users that, you had to drive them tooth and nail just to get them to actually log into their email, because it seemed like more things that they had to do in the day, more places they had to go for information. They didn't quite have that vision of what the world would look like once email was kind of fully incorporated into their life, and how much it would change the way they actually worked day to day. And I think that you could probably argue that there are good things and bad things about email, and it's perhaps taken over too much of our work life these days, and there are ways that we can cut down on that. But I think what we're trying to do at Central Desktop is really enable users to work in ways they never thought possible. Kind of like when we introduced email, we now have collaborative software that's going to take us to that next level and hopefully get us out of email and actually have us collaborating in real time in a shared solution. So, our agenda today, and I totally should have put the mic on so I could walk around the stage, because I feel like that's what's going to end up happening. But user experience and usability. I want to kind of take a step back from just the workspace design and talk through a little bit of what that theory looks like, and why you should use a user-centered approach when you're actually designing your workspace and making decisions about what's the right path forward. I do have some kind of quick tips and tricks that you can use, which I've called building fire, or the theme of the all fired up. But really, these are just basic things that you can apply today that we do with a lot of our users as we're getting started to make sure you've got kind of a streamlined and really usable interface for your users. And then some advanced tactics to really make it white hot. But these are things that you can use to apply to kind of take everything to the next level if you're really interested in diving in there and finding extra ways to improve your experience. So I don't think I need to reintroduce myself. Katie did a great job. But I have been with Central Desktop for a little over 2 years, and I get the distinct pleasure of sitting over our client services team, which means we get to interact with you guys on a daily basis, and we're all really passionate and excited about it. So if you have questions, please grab one of us and ask us questions. We would love to talk with you. So the first point I wanted to start with is just this one about trigger activity. It's not about clicking icons or downloading files. It's about encouraging communication. So the theme that I kind of want to carry through today is that I think we all know how to get people to download files and to click tasks complete. Or perhaps we don't. Sometimes that can be a challenge. But we're here because we have a higher vision than that. We want people to communicate better. We want them to collaborate more. We want them to spend less time doing administrative functions and more time being creative, or thinking about strategy, and thinking about kind of our business challenges. And that's what I'm hoping to drive through with some of the design techniques that we're talking about today. So, what is user experience and usability, and what's the difference? I think a lot of people think these two things is the same, and they're just a little bit different. User experience is much more about that emotional connection or that emotional experience that someone has when they go into an application. system. So think about your favorite software or your favorite application and the feeling you get when you see a new update come through. I, for one, know that when I see a new update for Google Maps on my phone, I feel really excited because I think there's always cool things coming out, whether it's random Wikipedia facts that I can find, or just kind of better traffic patterns in better directions. But this user experience can also be bad. There can be feelings of overwhelming or confusion. And those are the things that we want to address through our workspace design. And then there's usability. This is much more about kind of the user friendliness, how intuitive and simple it is for your users to get onto the site and actually find what they're looking for. But I think it's important that we take these two things together and kind of take that user-centered approach, because when we combine user experience and usability, what I believe, and what I hope you believe too, is that we end up with really happy, efficient, and empowered customers. So like I said, I don't have to spend 3 hours a day merging 7 Excel documents into one, because my team is able to collaborate in real time on that content. I can spend my time doing things that really delight me and make me happy and make me effective and engaged in my job. And I log into Central Desktop and I have a really positive experience because I'm excited to get in there because I know what the possibilities are and that there's new features coming out every day. So here are kind of 4 fundamental things that go into a user-centered approach. So when we're looking at our workspace design, I think these are 4 kind of quick gut checks that you can do. If you ask yourself, is my workspace or my kind of overall account useful? Is it usable? Is it desirable? Is it findable? So useful is really all about the content. Is it up to date? Is it engaging? Is it something that my users need to go and find? Is it usable? Is it intuitive? Is it easy to use? Is it simple to get to that content? And is it desirable? This is talking a little bit more about that user experience and that emotional connection. Does it match my overall company culture and branding? Because I think a lot of you also have strong company cultures, but you want to make sure that you're carrying through your Central Desktop account. I've talked to a number of customers who have branded it different names, and they call it things because that's really what gets their users excited and engaging with the system. And one of the most fundamental things is content findable. For anyone in this room who is not upgraded to the new top navigation, I strongly recommend that you do so. It's going to really enhance this findability. But it should be easy with minimal clicks for your users to find the content that they need. If you answer no to any of these questions in your current workspace design, I would say let's have a conversation because those are things that you can absolutely address with some of the techniques I'm going to go through. So, here's some additional techniques. And for anyone who's had the pleasure of talking with Chris SocialBridge on our product team, you can know that he uses a number of these approaches when we're looking at our own product development. But on the left-hand column, this is all about getting to know your users. And Beth mentioned this as well. You want to know kind of where your users have come from and where they're going. So some techniques that we use internally and that I would recommend you use, and I'll kind of circle back on these at the end. Simple user surveys that you send out to your users to get real-time feedback from them about what's challenging, what's a really great part of the experience, where they're confused, anything like that can be really helpful in kind of directing your overall workspace design. Creating user profiles and personas. I think one of the common misconceptions with workspace design is if I designed it around the things that I think are simple and intuitive to use, that's going to apply to everyone else and they're going to totally get it and they're going to understand what they need to do. Right? Has everyone had that thought at one point? I certainly have. Unfortunately, that's not true because not all users are created equal. They all have different roles and kind of actions and goals they're looking to do. So you can actually create those personas and profiles to better understand what each user is looking to complete and what actions are going to be valuable for them. And then you can incorporate those things into your workspace design. You can take all this information and kind of draft it into a story if you want to be able to tell your executive team why you need to make certain changes or just kind of digest that information. And user flows are really kind of looking through user patterns and how people are working through the workspaces you set up. And I'll talk through this one at the end just a little bit beyond what we typically see users do. And then on the right-hand side, these are just some additional techniques you can use. So content inventory is just taking a look at what you have today. What content is in there? Is it up to date? Is it still useful? When's the last time somebody actually looked at this document? If it's been over a year, I would argue that you need to update it or you can remove it. Because I think narrowing in on the content that's most valuable and taking out some of that older content and archiving it or putting it into kind of an isolated space that's just a repository of old stuff is going to really enhance your user experience because it's going to focus your users on finding the content that most relevant to them without them having to funnel through and search through a bunch of old content that's not. I would also strongly recommend, and again, I'll circle back on this one at the end, creating prototypes. So open up a workspace, draft the design you think might be more effective, and go do some user testing. Perhaps show it to a couple of users and do some surveying there. That will help you start to compare what you have today and visualize what that future can look like. Design patterns. What's really important here is to think about having a consistent design pattern across kind of all of your workspaces. So the content's going to change, the layout may change a little bit, but there are some areas that you want to keep consistent, and I'll talk about those in a couple of slides. And of course, as Katie said, coming from a Google background, I'm huge on A/B testing. So if you can go through and actually test one variation against another, I think you're going to get really results, because then you don't have to just say, hey, this feels like it's a better user experience. You can have some data to back that up. So here's my next quote to kind of take us into the basics section. If the user can't find it, it doesn't exist. And I think this is true. I think we've got a couple of different categories of users. We've got some users who are going to spend all day searching for content, and if they can't find it, that's not going to deter them. They're just going to search harder, and they're going to waste hours upon hours. You can ask Mark Fordham. I would occasionally classify myself in this category, and it's not always the best experience, because I should just be able to kind of quickly move on. But you have users on the other end of the spectrum. They can't find something in 30 seconds. They're done, they're out, and they're going to go back to an older version that they happen to have saved on their desktop from 2 years ago, and that's going to be good enough for them, and they're going to move forward. But as we know, as an organization, that's not really what we're going for. So first and foremost, let's make sure it's easy to use, that users can find the content we want them to, and get them to kind of get in there and use it. So our first tip, less is more. You've probably heard this if you've worked with anyone on the team before. But oftentimes I'll be working with a new customer, and they'll say, I got this great idea. We're going to put every application block on the home page, because then users are never going to have to click into any of the tabs. It's just going to be one click, and it's going to be so easy. And in theory, that sounds great. So what happens when we do that is that users land on the home page, and they have absolutely no idea what they're supposed to do, because there's so much content there, it's overwhelming. So what I would recommend, and what we generally recommend, is the rule of 3. Focus on kind of the 3 primary actions or elements of value that you're trying to drive within your workspace. Have those featured on the home page. If you have to have more content than that, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure those most valuable pieces are above the fold, because we find that users don't always go below the fold to see the content that kind of falls off that screen. And I'll show you a screenshot in a little bit that kind of speaks to this. But it's also important to remember to have fun with it. So include those fun elements that are going to delight your users and kind of add to your culture and your experience on the system. So in our example here, you can see I've got kind of my standard navigation. I apologize, it's a little small on the left-hand side with the content that I know that my team, because this is a project planning space, a team planning space, is going to use on a regular basis, all of the forms and kind of content that they need. Because we're planning and actively scheduling meetings, I featured a calendar application block on our homepage. The purpose of this is also to kind of disseminate information, so I've also included a discussion block. And beneath that, I've got the recent activity block, which really helps with information discovery. You can see that content starts to fall below the fold, so a lot of users aren't even going to scroll down, but I'm okay with that because I really want them to pay attention to the things that are at the top. So I talked about this a little bit earlier with these design patterns. Keep that design consistent. You want to have kind of a streamlined layout. So on the left-hand column, I would strongly recommend that you have a navigation panel there if you're going to use one, because that's kind of a standard browsing pattern that we see users do. They do an F-shaped scanning pattern. So they look down the left-hand column, they look left, right at the top, and then left, right beneath that. Stuff that falls outside of that content tends to fall into a dead space, and not everyone's going to see it, they're going to ignore it quite a bit. So feature your primary content here. Keeping this consistent pattern across your workspaces. Again, you can change up the content that you're featuring in it, but at least having that standard navigation on the left-hand side and a fairly streamlined layout is going to help your users when they land onto the page orient themselves to the content that's most important and fastest, which means they're going to be more efficient because they're not going to spend time trying to figure out where stuff is. And then this is the real nitty-gritty. I mentioned this on the previous slide, but as you can tell, it's important, so I featured it again. Keep that consistent look and feel across your workspaces. One thing that some teams will do is they'll actually change up the coloring of the workspaces to help kind of identify for teams easily, give a visual cue of what workspace they're in. That can be great to into it too, but keep that layout consistent. If you're using a lot of imagery on your site or your pages, optimize the layout for the 1024 by 768 resolution. This is just going to help as your users go between different devices to make sure that that content is scaling appropriately. And if you haven't already done so, when you go to customize your homepage, I would absolutely recommend that you insert tables to help keep all of the application blocks and that content consistent and kind of separated into a format that's manageable and easy to use. If you don't know how to do this, please talk to anyone on my team today and we can absolutely show you. But when you set those cell and table widths, set those to scale. So set them in percentages because as users are on a tablet or a laptop or a computer, that's going to ensure that that web page is always to scale for them. And that content is always going to look consistent. And if you haven't done so, please upgrade to top now. So here's a look at an internet homepage. As you can see, we've got kind of minimal tabs, so it's not confusing and overwhelming. We've included an image that really speaks to the culture of this organization. We still have that streamlined left-hand navigation panel, and we're using a 3-column layout for this table, but we've controlled the width so that that kind of primary interactive part, since this is a social internet, is featured in the center and is getting a majority of kind of that space. And lastly, kind of where to fail though. This might be a little bit terrifying if anyone in here has actually been on a cruise line, but it's okay to fail. I think Beth mentioned this, you're not going to get it right the first time, and that's absolutely fine. We don't expect you to. I think if you absolutely can't get it right the first time, talk to me. I would love to offer you a job. But you want to use the user testing and that feedback to take an iterative approach. Workspace design is always going to be an ongoing process. It's an evolution. So ask your users, do things work the way you think they should? And ask yourself, do things work the way I think they should? If they don't, then let's make some changes because we can really enhance that user experience. Sometimes people are really frustrated and confused, and it's simply that they need training or we need to make some minor adjustments to the system to get them engaged because they're frustrated they have to click off 20 different tasks every day when really they feel like they should only click one, and those are easy changes that we can manage. So, elevating your user experience to the next level. One of the simplest things that I always recommend to my clients do is create a user feedback loop. You can throw a simple database into a workspace. If you have a help center that you created for your users, put it there. And you can have a really simple form, or you can make it complex, so I will tell you simpler forms tend to get more feedback, of asking people for feedback and their suggestions. If you have the time and the ability, create a user survey and send that out with direct questions of the feedback that you're looking to acquire, so that you actually have kind of direct user quotes, and there's people that you can go back and follow up with that you think might be able to provide some good input for you. So, what exactly would you say you do here? Again, I would say shadow key users. I can't tell you how many times I've been in sessions with teams and I've asked for their feedback and I've asked them to walk me through their day and what takes up their time on a daily basis. And that's all really good information, and I definitely think you should have those meetings as well. But when I ask them if I can sit and shadow them, I learn a ton more information. Because there's things that become secondhand to you over time that you just kind of forget to mention to somebody else because you're so used to doing it. It's how you've always done things. So when I, as an outsider, can sit behind you and watch how you're working, I can ask you questions and I can start to really dig to the root of the problem and address it a little bit more effectively. Does everyone in here know that you can install Google Analytics tracking in your workspaces? So if you go to the company setup, it's a little bit varied. Under the Look and Feel tab, you can actually start tracking your user experience or your user behavior with Google Analytics. So Google Analytics in and of itself is kind of a beast. I can't really help you with understanding that, but they have some great help content that will. And we're certainly helped to give it our best try in helping you interpret all of that data. But as you drop that code in, it's really easy to install. If you started to map out what that user flow should look like, so how people should be moving through the system given what kind of role or persona they will fill, Google Analytics is going to give you the data to validate whether that's actually happening. So I can see if users are falling out of one of those flows or out of that funnel, where that's happening, then I can drill into that workspace or that part of that user flow and see what might be happening. So this can be really great at just getting that data. The chart we're looking at right here is a behavior flow chart, so exactly as I'm talking about. I can understand how people are moving throughout the site and navigating. And finally, A/B testing. So the important thing about A/B testing for anyone who's done it is you want to isolate the number of changes that you're making at any given point in time. So develop a prototype that's very similar to workspaces that your users might be using today, and do some testing with users that you trust that you think have good feedback to provide. But only change one element at a time. Because if you change too many things, you're never going to know what actually contributed to the change. In this example here, I simply swapped out kind of that initial calendar block with a list view or with a grid view so that I can see which way is more user-friendly for my users to actually engage that information and get the content that they need. So my best practice today. Apply a user-centered design technique to your workspace design. Focus on the main actions and needs of your users to drive your workspace layout, and then test your design and actually get hands-on user feedback to validate those assumptions. We have really great content on our city blog that Adam over here is responsible for creating. And we included some articles that I found really useful. As Katie mentioned, please join our community on LinkedIn. It's a great place to connect with other users that are going through the same experience as you are. And always feel free to reach out to CD Professional Services because we're here to help. Any questions?